Hi guys, welcome to our plot point 2 video of A Monster Calls. Just like yesterday, you are going to need a piece of paper, maybe two if you can get hold of them, and something to write with. Okay, so we're going to get started right away. Now, today we're going to be using time clues, complex sentences, and a relative clause. So, just like yesterday, you are going to start off by pausing the video and making yourself an inspiration page. It's a bit easier today. Chunk 1 is going to stay as all one bit. Chunk 2 is going to be broken into 2 bits. And chunk 3 again is going to stay as 1 bit. So I want you to pause the video and make yourself your inspiration page. Pause the video now and make your inspiration page. Okay, now we're ready. So for today, we're not going to look at a video. We're just going to look at this picture. So I want you to think about, following on from yesterday when Connor woke up from his nightmare, what do you notice in this picture? You need to have a look, have a think. If you want to pause the video to have a closer look, you can. What do you think is going on in this picture? Okay, boys and girls, so you should have had time to have a look now. And what you should be able to see is an alarm clock. And it looks like it's on a bedside table because it's got things in the background, like it looks like some medicine or something. But it also looks like it's got some twigs or branches around it. And we're going to be coming on to that a bit later in the story, but it's giving a clue of something that's going to happen. So, today, the next part of the story is time starts to stand still. Connor's in his room and he starts to feel a bit better. Yesterday, he was feeling -10, but today, in today's lesson, he notices, he looks around him, he notices all the clues in his bedroom and he's safe and he starts to feel a bit calmer. Now, he's not feeling ecstatic, but he feels calmer. Okay, so I've written this. It says 12:07. That was the time on the clock, if you remember. 7 minutes past midnight. For Connor, time dragged desperately as his heart pounded in his chest. It was beating twice as fast as the ticking clock. So time's moving really slowly for him. Have you ever had that feeling before when you're lying in bed trying to get back to sleep and you can't and time goes so slowly? That's how Connor's feeling. But then it says, emerging from the darkness was his familiar teddy bear, his comforting duvet, and the reassuring click of his radiator. So he's looking around the room and he's seeing all the things that remind him that he's safe and in a safe place. Connor, who had leaned closer to the edge of his bed, looked back at the clock. So here what we've got is Connor sitting up in his bed, leaning closer and looking at the clock. He's almost waiting for time to go past. So we're going to start right away on chunk 1. Okay, boys and girls, so what we're going to do now is we're going to start on chunk 1. And what I've asked you is, how can we infer that time seems to have stood still or is moving slowly? So I've got all pictures here of different clocks, and in them they all show the same time, 12:07. I'm also going to give you some sound effects in a moment as well. I want you to think about a time where you've been waiting for something and time seems to move slow. What clues could you give? I could say that time's dragging. I could say that the clock was ticking by slower than his heart. I could say that time's crawling by. I'm also going to play you some sound effects. Now, while you're taking notes, I want you to listen to these sound effects and think about how can you add them in to show that time's moving slowly. Maybe I could say the second hand was crawling by. Maybe I could say the rhythm of the clock was slow. Maybe I could say he could hear the cogs inside the clock. Add as many ideas as you can into chunk 1. Maybe I could say the clock was like raindrops. Maybe I could say the clock hands were clunking. Maybe I could say that the clock, the sound of the clock, was like a bug in his brain irritating him. Now this one's quite fast. How can I show that it will be going slowly? This almost sounds like it's chugging like a train. Maybe you could use that word. Maybe it's beating or whirring. Okay, so I'm going to show you now some of my examples from my inspiration page that you can magpie. So I said, time dragged desperately. I said, seconds crawled by. I said, the clock ticked. Time seemed frozen still. Minutes were frozen in ice. Now I'm using a metaphor there, aren't I? Because the time isn't really frozen. So if you want, pause my video now and magpie some of my ideas. Pause the video now. Okay, now we've done that, we're going to go on to chunk 2 now. I've got a picture here of a bedroom. And I need to have a look at the bedroom. I need to think about, in a child's bedroom, what might be there, what sights, what sounds, maybe even what smells would be there to make Connor feel calmer and safe. I can see lots of clues. I can see a nightlight. I can see his lamp, or drawings or posters on the wall. I can see a mobile up here. I can see light through the window. Maybe toys over the floor. Maybe the smell of fresh laundry. Maybe it's just his duvet and his pillow. What is in Connor's room that makes him feel safer? Pause the video now and add some clues. Okay, so now I've put in some examples. So it could be his teddy bear or his toys, his duvet, his radiator, maybe warming him up, or maybe a sound of a radiator, maybe posters or a nightlight. If you want to pause the video and magpie some of those ideas, feel free to do so now. And then we're going to move on to the next box. So, what adjectives can we use to show that an item is comforting? So I want to show that these items make him feel safe. So if I'm thinking about a pillow, I could say that it's soft, it's fresh, it's comforting, it's relaxing. If I'm thinking about a toy, maybe it could be loving, consoling, supportive, reassuring, soothing, calming, uplifting, gentle, tender. Pause the video and add some ideas into that second box in chunk 2. Okay, now you've done that, I'm going to give you some of my ideas. So, words I've stolen are comforting, reassuring, familiar, tender, which means it's quite soft and gentle, warm, supportive. If you want to pause the video and magpie some of those, you're more than welcome to. Okay, we're going to go on to chunk 3. So, we're going to do a relative clause. Now, if you remember, with the relative clause, we start with a basic sentence. So I've got my basic sentence here. Connor looked back at the frozen clock. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to split it in between the subject and the verb. And I'm going to add some extra information. So think about, what else could you tell me about Connor? Maybe it could be Connor, who was feeling calmer. Connor, who rubbed his eyes and yawned. Connor, who pulled the duvet up over himself. Connor, who shielded his eyes from the light coming through the window. Connor, who still felt a bit scared. What extra information could you give me about Connor? Write it into chunk 3 now. Okay, I'm going to show you some of my ideas. So I'm just going to close myself down just so that you can read all of these. So it says, who leaned closer to the edge of the bed, who watched the clock face carefully, who held his breath in anticipation, means he's waiting for something, who was dreary, so it means he's a bit foggy-headed, he's a bit sleepy still, who was dreary from his disturbed sleep. So what you can do now is magpie some of those, write them into your chunk 3 box. Pause the video if you wish. Okay, now finally we're going to go back to our writing. So again, in a moment, I'm going to close myself down so that you can see all of the writing, but I'll do the first 2 chunks with you first. So, just like always, the black bits you are allowed to keep the same. If you want to deepen the moment and change them, fantastic, but you don't have to. It's the coloured bits you have to change. So it says 12:07, 7 minutes past midnight. For Connor, time dragged desperately. But how can I infer that time's going slowly? I could say, for Connor, minutes were frozen in ice. Or for Connor, the second hand chugged by slowly as his heart pounded in his chest. It was beating twice as fast as the booming clock or the chugging clock. Twice as fast as the crawling clock. So if you want to pause the video and do chunk 1, you can now. Then we're going to move on to chunk 2. Emerging from the darkness. So we're now talking about all the clues in his room that make him feel safe and comforting. Emerging from the darkness was his familiar teddy bear, his comforting duvet, and the reassuring clicking of his radiator. But I'm going to change them for something else. So I could say emerging from the darkness was his consoling nightlight, his supportive posters, and the reassuring smell of fresh laundry. Okay, so if you want to pause the video and do chunk 2, you can now. And finally, we're going to do chunk 3. So we're going to be using this basic sentence and adding in a relative clause. So you're going to need to start with Connor, comma, who. Who what? Let's add some additional information. Connor, who had leaned closer to the edge of his bed, comma, looked back at the frozen clock. Now I'm going to change that for something else. I could say Connor, who was waiting for 12:08, looked back at the frozen clock. Connor, who desperately wanted to get back to sleep, looked back at the frozen clock. Connor, who yawned loudly, looked back at the frozen clock. What extra information can you put in? Pause the video now and write your chunk 3. Okay, team. Now you've done that, what you need to do is you need to go to your Class Dojo page. You need to go into your portfolios, click Start Activity, and send me a photo of your writing. Again, I don't need to see your inspiration page, but if you want to send me a photo of that separately, that's brilliant. But I do need to see your writing in order for you to earn your dojos. And I'll see you next time for plot point 3. Bye, guys.